All right, so I think we can all agree that it's about time that you get your finances back on track. For the past 2 years here, that's something that I've been massively improving, and therefore I have some points that I wanted to share with you all. Personal finance, and it is an important one. Look, I think too many people, when I bring this up, they'll tell me, "Oh, that's fine because what we're thinking about is the money, and why is it such a focus point for you?" And honestly, why would it not be? For the very simple reason that, look, as it says here, ultimately, nothing is free, right? Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with perhaps the capitalist society that we have, you need money to get around. And whether you like it or not, your finances are impacting the way that you live your life. How you live, where you live, the type of food that you eat, perhaps even how much or how many times you can eat your food, right? The trips that you take. All of that is ultimately derived from your personal financial situation. So as such, we want to get a grip on it and make sure that whatever that situation is, it aligns with our personal vision, right? That's the most important one. And I think the key thing here to note, as perhaps you're already thinking about personal finance, right? And perhaps it's something that's completely new for you, especially if that's the case, I want you to keep this quote here in mind. Money is a terrible master, but an excellent servant, right? And when we get involved with personal finance, when we perhaps go on this journey, I think we need to keep in mind that we can't let it change us, that you need to remain in the driver's seat. Because the second you let money take control, it really starts to control your life in a negative way. And it's only what it says here, right? It's a double-edged sword. It can be great, you kind of need it, but if it slips through, if it starts to take control over you, it can really warp how you are, how you behave to other people, and what started out as a tool for you to make sure that you can live your life in the best way you see fit, all of a sudden takes control and perhaps puts you on a very different path. Look, another point to note is that money is not just about the relationship between you and your finances, right? It involves everyone around you as well, right? Whether you're the guy or the woman in the household bringing in the cash, or perhaps both you're working, definitely your contribution to that household financials shape the household in a pretty significant way. Just something to keep in mind. And here's, I think, an important one to keep in mind for that mindset when it comes to money. Where we're going to be starting out on this journey, we're going to be taking our finances seriously, and perhaps finally we're going to start to spend some time with it. At that point, it's easy to see that the glass is half full, right? Because I'm going to ask you to come up with some goals, with some longer term vision. And then you're going to look at your current situation, and you're going to notice that all of a sudden, you're a long way out. And that's completely fine. Once again, your relationship with money really shapes how you are. So if you then only think of, oh wow, I'm so far off, I still need an additional, 200-300K. Look, and if all you're doing is focusing on the negatives, on the gap that you still have, it'll turn you bitter. And look, I'm not really into the wishy-washy, but there's definitely, let's say, a law of the universe component to it, where what you're sending out tends to come back to you. And if all you're sending out, if all you're thinking, if all your thoughts and emotions are those negative ones, I think it really does impact what life brings to you as well. Now, that being said, short-term pain points can be fine as motivation, right? You can definitely use those. So that's maybe a short negative burst, but at that point, you flip it into motivation and constructive into something positive. Maybe it sounds this way as I'm listing a lot of negatives for personal finance, but that's really not the case, right? This is not an excuse. You need to get involved. And perhaps me listing out all these negatives can come across as you as, look, why do we even want to, want to do this? I promise you the positives that are listed at the beginning still count. None of these things should be taken as an excuse not to get close to it, right? Your finances need to be under your control, so get involved. Now, luckily, we don't need to start from scratch, right? We can look at what other people have been doing, and more importantly, we can look at what other people have been doing wrong. And I think there's a few common pitfalls that tend to happen. Now, before we go into the details, let's say that for personal finance, you can mess this up on two different ways. The first one is perhaps just the core financial habits, right? And the other one is the management tools, right? So one is how you live your life financially, and the other one is how are you tracking and managing those finances as you're living your life. We're looking at the core financial habits. What do we see that's going wrong? Well, we're looking at credit card debt. That's obviously a major one. I don't even know the statistic, but I think a shocking percentage of people are in credit card debt. it's definitely regionally based, right? Something in the US where there's a lot of credit facilities, where there's a lot more leeway. I think it's a lot worse. If you look at the likes of Europe, where the regulations are a little bit stricter and the room that you have on cards is less as well. People don't tend to rack up as much of a debt, but still, it's a significant percentage. Now, other things that you oftentimes see wrong is people have a short-term focus on it, right? People are perhaps living above their means, or they're getting involved with sort of the standard middle-class trap, which is lifestyle creep, right? As you are increasing your salary, you're boosting up your expenses, and therefore it feels that even though you've been making more, you don't really seem to have more left at the end of the month. Dangerous one. Now for that second portion, perhaps your core financial habits are right, but you just have a really poor approach to your management tools. You might not even have any system. Perhaps you've got a simplified tool where essentially it just lacks the usability to capture things the way you need them to. Or perhaps you've got something that's so complex that it warrants you to not use it at all, and it kind of puts you back at the first one, where in all reality, you don't have a tool that you're working with. The interesting thing is if you look at these two main sections, right? I'd say that generally speaking, that second one is the lesser sin. But the question is, can you afford to lose out on the second one? Let me iterate here. If you're making a bunch of money, you can live your life, and as long as you do nothing crazy, you don't really need to manage or track anything, because there's always enough of a buffer there to really work with, right? Sure, if you're going to start buying Maseratis, it doesn't matter how much you make, you're going to be fucked either way. But in most cases, right? Whereas especially if you know that things are relatively tight, that only makes the need for a management tool so much more real, right? Because you just need it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make ends meet, or you're not going to have an oversight to properly control or steer your ship. So that's everything that people do wrong. I suppose then the follow-up question would be, what is the right way? And look, let me just say that it's really hard to pinpoint what you should do. Mainly because personal finance is exactly that. It's personal. And you can sit me down with different people, and based on their circumstances and based on their priorities, I would come up with a slightly different tool for each of them. But that being said, I think my general system has overarching building blocks, and there's definitely some rules that should be in place for everyone. First one, as I said, you need some type of financial management tool. Now, once again, based on where you are in personal finance journey and what you want to get out of it, that can be in various levels of complexity, but at least the basics need to be present there, and we'll get to this later on. The second one is earn before you spend. Really important one. I'd say one of those core principles that they kind of help you out with perhaps not having the best management tool, just by mitigating some of the risks there. It's a very straightforward one. In essence, all I'm saying is that you earn money first, you have it aside, you have it put somewhere, and you take out of that, right? And if that money runs out, if your budgeted pocket runs out, and at that point you stop buying stuff. Compared to the likes of Klarna, for instance, where the whole concept, and it's essentially the same with the credit card as well, you buy it now, and essentially you're earning it later, right? Or at least you're paying it later. Now the key point here, long-term outlook, right? So just know personal finance is ultimately probably about your retirement or longer-term goals. Another important one, cash is king, and that kind of brings it back to the future again, right? Because in the longer-term outlook, we're perhaps looking at asset building, but in the short term, you have to realize personal finance for me is ultimately about cash management, right? Paying bills, whether that's bills directly for operational expenditures, or whether that's bills perhaps for credit card payments or debt service payments. Those bills need to be paid. Now, speaking of debt payments, credit cards. Honestly, too many people have credit cards. In my opinion, credit cards need to be earned, and the honest truth here is that they are just not suitable for most people. That might sound harsh, but I've just seen too many people in credit card debt. It's definitely something that you can use. It has some upsides, but for most people, they just can't. For myself, I do use a credit card. I'm based out of Qatar, Doha here. I have a Qatar Airways credit card, which allows me to rack up some serious points by just making sure that I pretty much do all my expenses on that credit card. But that's where it gets dangerous, right? Obviously there is a limit on the card, but that limit is a lot higher, perhaps than when you take your salary and you just pay your stuff outright out of there, right? Whereas in a credit card, if you budget for your expenditures to be a certain amount, you can go over, and then in the next month you can have to spend most of your salary paying off the credit card, and that can turn into that vicious cycle where people end up constantly paying off their credit cards, or even having to use multiple cards in order to make ends meet, and that's stupid. Pay yourself first, mainly relating to savings and investments, right? So you want to make sure that savings and investments are done first before you get into all the other stuff. People tend to suck at planning ahead, so if you wait to invest what's left at the end of the month, then I can tell you that's most likely going to be close to nothing. And that kind of gets to the second point, right? You want to come up with some percentage caps for yourself on what you want to spend on certain accounts or items, right? We all know the rule of you should probably use only 30% of your income on your rent or on your housing. I know that that's got some gray areas to it, right? Especially if you're on a low end of the income spectrum. It's really hard to stick to that percentage rule. You might not have a choice. But generally speaking, that is somewhat of a rule that you want to work with. Okay, look, I was initially thinking to run you through the mindset, the importance of the golden rules, as well as the next portion, which is essentially going to be the actual build-up and the items that you need in that personal finance hub. I think if we're going to do that, you're going to be... I think if we do that, you'll be very tired. So for now, I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to leave you with the following. Look, your personal finance, it's simple, but not easy. It's highly diverse because it's very different depending on each person. But then again, it is vital for absolutely everyone. So it's not a matter of whether you should have it. You need to have it. It's more of a matter of how can you work with something that tailors and fits to your exact needs. And that's definitely something we'll talk about in the next video as well. So get at it, guys, and I will see you all next time.